Like, what's your philosophy in life? Do you have one?
Maybe the reason so many people feel burnt out and aimless and hopeless and meaningless.
I think most people are struggling with exactly what we're talking about right now.
How do we apply moral boundaries to this concept?
Because morals are defined by a society, but they're also defined by you internally.
My own happiness and sense of meaning is tied up with other people's happiness.
When Jesus was asked, what are the greatest commandments? And, the Bible has a lot of commandments. He said,
We often work hard and feel busy, but something doesn't feel right. In his book, Easy Hard versus Hard Hard, Dr. Bobby Shelton argues that the problem might not be that we're avoiding things that are hard, but it might be that we're not focusing on the right kind of hard things. If that's true, I think it raises a bigger question about what actually makes a life well lived. Dr. Bobby Shelton, welcome to the show.
hey, Angelo, thank you so much for having me. I've looked forward to this conversation for quite some time. So thank you again.
Well, yeah, I mean, I've got your book right here. I've read it a couple of times. It's a good book. I recommend it to people. So let's start kind of from the top. I mean, what do you mean when you say things like easy, hard, and hard, hard?
Simply put, easy hard is the work that you do for others. It could be approval, it could be recognition, it could be a degree, a certification, all the things that probably look very glamorous on a LinkedIn profile or Instagram, Facebook kind of thing. Whereas hard is the deep work. What do you want to work on for you? Now, I will make the distinction up front that the work I'm talking about could be your 9 to 5 or your profession, but it's more about what are you working on in your soul? Because so often, most people are like me. They associate their work with who they are, their identity. And distinguishing between the work that I do and what I put my effort into was invaluable to me to both break anxiety, start getting freedom, finding peace and tranquility in my life, and really focusing my efforts, which surprisingly, I probably work harder than I did back then, but it's more efficient, more effective, and more pleasing to both my psyche and the results that I'm getting.
Yeah, that's interesting. So, like, you wouldn't say that prior to kind of identifying this, that you weren't working hard or that you didn't feel busy. It wasn't like that at all. It wasn't. We're not talking about being inactive versus active. We're really talking about something different than that, right? Is it fair to say we're talking about the kind of action that lets us pursue meaning, right?
Yeah. It's like, it's what are your efforts doing, right? Or were you busy just to be busy? I know that term's bannered about a lot. Or are you busy for your purpose, your vision? A lot of coaches, a lot of help people will say you got to find your vision and your purpose. But how about if you know what that is, but every action you take every single day either takes you further away from it, or even you begin to lose it because you're not spending that time and effort. And I think a lot of us feel really trapped. Like we're in a job we don't like, or, I wish I had this, or I'll be happy when this. If you're saying things like that, chances are you're not feeding your soul and you're just feeding either your shadow self, your ego, whatever you want to call it. And that disconnect right there is what I think robs people of happiness and joy in their lives.
Yeah, when I'm thinking about my own life, I think and I like that you pointed out, we're not just talking about people's like jobs. We don't mean find the work that is meaningful or matters to you. We don't mean find the job that matters to you. It might be related to that. But I mean, I can think in my own life how I've gone through different times where I have felt meaning or less meaning. And I kind of feel that connected to that is this like, you're downtrodden, right? Like you're not enjoying your everyday the way that you have in the past or that you should. And it's almost like, I don't know, maybe we're all built with that kind of compass, but we just need to kind of get in tune with it. But I do feel like maybe people know what it means to pursue hard. Like they have this intuitive sense of what that is, or that at least they admire it when they see it. What do you think would stop somebody from like seeing that, or being like someone like me who I feel what that is. I think I have an intuitive feeling about that. And when I see it in other people, I definitely think, oh, that's admirable. But I think a lot of us have a difficulty making the leap between I admire that and I'm going to actually have the discipline or motivation or whatever you think that takes to actually do that for myself.
So I think a lot of people limit themselves because they think that whatever their hard is their full-time, I guess, job or the work that they're doing. And that's not the case. What the case is that like, you've got to take whatever you want, your vision and purpose, and apply it to whatever situation you're in now, because you've built a life, but that doesn't mean you have to stay in that same mindset, right? If we were going to start something new and take where you're at today in your career, or where you're at today in your life, it took a long time to get there. you're not going to be able to go and switch to hard immediately. It's just not practical, right? Especially if you have to bring in new things into your life. But once you start taking that first step and you implement the first and the second and the third step, it starts becoming clearer, clearer, clearer. And then one day you kind of wake up and you feel free. You don't have anxiety anymore. You don't have to focus on your hard, because your hard is really what you are to begin with. And you just cultivate it no matter where you're at and what you're doing.
Yeah, I have this kind of personal idea that might be very similar to this called like kind of knowing your core, like knowing what's
Mm.
at the core of you. And I always think of my younger self when I think about that. And when I think about times where I've done things that are meaningful to me in my life, there are times when I didn't wake up every day and have to remake the decision. Like I was connected to something that was important to me. I started taking action on that thing, but I didn't wake up tomorrow and redecide if that thing was worthwhile anymore. I kind of shut that door and went down the path. And every day I just like went down the path. And what I found was that, you do that for so long, you start to think, if I had have said to myself every day, is this still worth it? Maybe I would have jumped off. So like that mountain can seem high, right? And sometimes it's worth, after you've maybe identified what those things are, is like you said, just you got to try something. But I think on top of that, it almost seems like maybe you got to try something and you almost have to make a decision to commit for a certain period of time, because you're going to have to build that character in yourself. That's what I have found. Does that kind of seem like what you see in people when you use this?
Yeah, yeah. And I like how you say core too, because when you lose that core, things do become difficult because you're in a complete, you're almost fighting your brain every day. Like I don't want to go to this job, but I want the rewards it provides. So every day you wake up and there's that kind of pit in your stomach. I mean, how many people have you heard they have that like Sunday night blues, or they don't sleep well on Sunday nights because they know they're dreading going into the work the next day? But if we can disassociate the work with what we're doing, with who we are, I think that that's where the real progress comes. And like you said, sticking with anything is the key, because no matter how old you are right now listening to this call, you've probably been in this one mindset for 10, 20, 30 years, even longer for some of us. And breaking that is going to be very difficult for your brain. It's actually going to fight you. It's very interesting that, we all know it's a scientific fact that the brain's main job is to protect us. But it's funny how it overprotects us. So if you think, hey, I'm going to change my belief, I'm going to wake up happier, more focused, more disciplined, whatever, your brain is like, oh no. And it pushes back even harder. And you know what? I think we make it worse for ourselves though too, because we think about it. We set start dates. We say, oh, I'm going to start doing X on day Y. How about you start the next minute?
So yeah, I mean, all this stuff kind of really, I think we all probably can translate this into our own, what we've experienced in our own life. In your book, there was an interesting moment where something like what you're talking about did happen, where you had, I think, a routine already in place. You were on a journey. Let's call it maybe a bodily transformation, a fitness type of a journey. And there's a moment at 4 a.m. when it's cold outside, and you have to kind of you have a moment to pause. And it seems to me from the read that in that moment there's this acknowledgement about what I'm really doing this for. Is that true? Can you kind of explain to me that? Because the reason I'm asking is because I wonder if there's a lot of people that they might almost resent hard, even if it's the right thing, because they're maybe thinking, you know what, I'm doing this as a sacrifice for somebody else. But if everybody else took all that pressure away, they actually would want to still do that. And sometimes you have to be put in these moments of like, well, don't do it then. There's every reason not to.
Yeah.
And in that moment, you say, no, I want to. It's in me that want comes from me. Yeah. Can you talk about that for a minute?
Yeah. And for those who don't know, I did go on a massive weight loss journey. I weighed 354 pounds, at one point in my life. And at first I wanted to lose weight just because I didn't want to be fat, or I wanted to look good for others, or I didn't want to be made fun of, and all these issues. But that wasn't for me. That wasn't a decision for me. But when it started getting hard and I started doing the work, that didn't make it easier at first because my mindset wasn't right? I was still doing it for other people. and I wasn't doing it for myself. It wasn't until I realized, like, hey, this isn't about weight loss. This is about how much better I can feel, how much my health can improve. This can improve all these areas of my life, that I started owning that. So prior to that moment in my time, if you would have called me and said, hey, let's go do something, I would skip a workout. I wasn't making it a priority because it wasn't really my priority. You almost have to make what you decide to be your hard heart, or what you know that be your hard heart at the time. You almost have to make it your standard. And regardless of what comes in your way, you meet that standard. And once you start doing that for a while, it becomes natural. And then you don't have to think about it as much. My dad used to tell me all the time when I tell him something I want to do, he's like, do you want it enough? Well, as a kid, I thought he was just, being a dad or whatever. But in reality, think of the wisdom of that. Maybe you have young children. Maybe you have to travel a lot for work at the time. So determine if this is what you want to do, and make sure the timing is right as well. And if the timing isn't right, that doesn't mean you can't start working on it. Let's say you want to make a change in your mental attitude, or the way you operate your life. Start where you're at, where you can, make it small. But I think the real difference is find out what value you put on it. Because if you do not value it for yourself, if you value it because I think somebody else is going to like it, you're probably not going to sustain. I mean, we're in a culture, I know it's not January now, but in January, how many people hit the gym? I mean, people who go to the gym every day hate January. But what's the quit date? It's like January 21st, somewhere in there, because they don't really want it for themselves. Because if they did, they'd be there on February 21st, March 21st, year in, year out.
Yeah, there's a few good things to take from that. I'll kind of say that, like, I know that to the kind of like that working out and January 1st type of thing. I know that when I was heavily into athletics in my past, I would always say that, if I want to get something done, I start now. If it's October, I don't wait till January. I start tomorrow. I start right now. And in fact, the people that are in that kind of mind state, when January rolls around, the first 2 weeks of January, they'll go work out at home because all the other people are in the way of the things they want to get done. And so that's just, it's so different. Now, there was a couple of concepts. Now, number one, I think, I'll come back to this, but I want to touch on it just so I don't lose it for later. But the idea about there's going to be so many things out of your control. We all know there's a lot of our futures out of our control. A lot of what's happening to us out in the world that's impacting us right now is out of our control. But you're talking about starting with identifying the things that are in your control. And that sounds to me like it's a little bit reminiscent of some ethical stoicism. Now, but before I get into that, you also touched on the fact that, you've incorporated, this is your thinking, but it was also incorporated, or it's been, you grew up, your father kind of gave you this wisdom. And I think it's really interesting that concept that he gave. Well, there's another guy who gives a nod to his father in his book. And so Nicomachean Ethics by Aristotle is actually, the name of that is a nod to his father, his father's ethics. Some people listening to this might recognize a little bit of a bridge between what we're talking about here, this idea that a life well lived or flourishing isn't about pursuing just comfort. It's about, virtue and meaning and getting somewhere that's worthwhile. And to what extent do you see hard as almost like a modern day version of a similar concept?
Yeah, I mean, in direct comparison to Aristotle's thinking, it's close. But Aristotle still has some more external factors in there than I think that you can get to. But initially, it's got to be intrinsic. It's got to be internal, because what happens to you, you talk about span of control and what you can and can't control. You can't let that stop you from what you want to do. Not initially at first, right? Because, there's two things that you can control. And this goes back to the Stoic kind of thinking, your thoughts and your behaviors. Okay. It doesn't matter if it's raining outside. If your behavior is you're going to run today, you run today regardless of it's raining, right? So that's a simplified example. Whereas as I understand it, Aristotle, principles, you do, it is kind of like for that external gain, whereas this is like truly what you want to be. And if you're living in congruence with that want to, then, or your hard heart, if you want to call it that, the external things don't matter. And I hate being dogmatic, but you almost have to be dogmatic in your approach at first in this one area, because if you don't, it's so easy to slip back in.
Yeah, so it sounds like what we're addressing so particularly the subset of things that make you flourish that are intrinsic in you, that have nothing to do with feedback or praise or any of that sort of thing other than from yourself. Um, which for me, which for me almost starts to blend like this idea, this eudaimonic idea, sure, but also blended with, like you say, Stoicism, but also blended with Epicurean type of thinking in there. So it's really interesting. So I was curious, like, to what extent do you think self-discovery or self-knowledge is a prerequisite to even doing any of this? Is that like something someone has to proactively take on if they're going to kind of find their north in this way?
Yeah. Knowing who you are and being radical in your self-discovery and the conversations with yourself. And by radical, I do not mean abusive. Be honest with yourself, because if you lie to yourself, it's going to make any change harder and harder and harder. That's why I like what you said earlier. I'm going to start today. Well, if you say I'm going to start on January 1st, how about if January 1st, you have 3 feet of snow on the ground? Like, and you break that promise. Well, by the time the snow gets cleared, let's say it's January 8th, it's going to be that much difficult, because that's 7 days of a promise you made to yourself that you didn't execute. So your brain's going to say, whoa, Bobby, you didn't do this on January 1st, and you've been telling yourself this for 3 months. Start today. If you're listening to this and you want to start making a change and it's early enough in the day, start this moment, start the next moment. And why I say that is because the more you think, the more all these blockers get into your way. And I think that only comes from self-discovery. Maybe you're not that type of person. Maybe you are a type of person that is very scheduled and disciplined, and if you say I'm going to start on January 1st, come hell or high water, I'm going to be doing it, right? Maybe that's right, but that's part of your self-discovery, because I don't know you. In science, they always talk about an N of 1, and I used to hate that, because I was like, no, we're all so similar. But now when it comes to the thoughts, not when it comes to your behavior, there is no other person in the world like you or I. Our experiences, our passions, our thoughts, everything is different. So really explore who you are. And I think that's one of the key components of the hard work. You know yourself. You don't outsource your thoughts. You don't outsource your actions. You don't outsource anything. You have complete control over that one thing. And I think once you start looking at, like, if you do a self-analysis of what we have control of and what we don't have control of, I think most people will find this is true. There's also a third, what we have limited control of, but that's kind of like more modern day Stoicism. But I also think it applies. But for making a change immediately, those are the two things I would definitely focus on. And I do it through, your self-evaluation and your self-exploration.
Whenever I've kind of looked at my own self, and I wonder if people who are listening to this find the same thing. Even when I'm trying to be good at self-appraisal, I'll find that I'll get focused on a part of who I am, and eventually I'll feel some sort of dissatisfaction, and I kind of have to pop back up for air and look around again and say, am I ignoring some other facet of who I am? Because there's a reason why I'm not feeling great right now. And without fail, there's something I'm missing. So, like, hey, why am I feeling this way? I've been learning a lot lately. I've been seeing my friends a lot. I've been doing this. Oh, well, I'm not spending enough time with my family, or I haven't been doing something in the gym that's important to me, or whatever it is, right? So there's usually, or I haven't been being creative enough. I find that, like, to your point, it might not just be that there's one thing you're trying to be. There's a picture you're trying to embody for yourself that you've created. And it's probably multivariate and multifaceted. And probably over time, you get to know who you want to be a little bit better, and it becomes clearer as you go. Maybe people listening to this think if they do an assessment, they're going to kind of get all the answers. Maybe what they're going to get is the starting point. And as they move forward, they're going to kind of clarify for themselves, oh, I can do that. And some of the curtains kind of fall, and they start to see more about who they could be and what they could be, and have the confidence to know, look, I can go after this. So I think it's really interesting. And it also kind of is a method of combating maybe our desire for comfort. At what point would you say comfort would become in its own, comfort becomes your character if you kind of repeat it too much? Is that something that you see in people where delaying something, I'm going to go start that in January. Is that kind of the comfort side of who I am, protecting me from the uncertainty of change?
Yeah, no, and it's so funny you bring this up because I just finished a newsletter this morning on
Oh, did you?
comfort and how.
I didn't read it. I promise. I
Yeah,
haven't
well,
got there
it
yet. It's
hasn't
in my
come out
inbox,
yet,
I'm
so you
sure.
couldn't have read it yet. But yeah, but it's so funny because that's been on my mind lately because of some observations that I have with people. Yeah, that comfort piece, it creeps up on you. Like, and I'm not going to say all comfort is bad. We all need downtime. You need to relax. You need to restore. But where is comfort replacing your values? Where is it replacing what you truly want to do? You are going to find things that you don't like along the way. And that's why I encourage a periodic self-evaluation. Where am I making progress in this area? That doesn't mean you don't change a few things, but if you focus on the things that you see over time that aren't working, that's going to lead you back to this comfort. Like, oh, I failed at everything. It's funny, like whenever we have a negative thought, I don't know if this is true for you. It's always, I fail all the time, or I'm worthless, or I can't do anything right. Well, we know that's not true. You're just frustrated with the thing you probably want the most, or the thing you think you want the most at the time. And that's where the comfort comes in. It's like, I think it was Marcus Aurelius who talks about, when you wake up and the sheets are calling you, like that's comfort. That doesn't mean that there aren't days that you need a little more sleep, but if that becomes your norm, watch out for it. And the only way you're going to really identify comfort is with this constant self-evaluation. And again, the cycle is up to you. I encourage people to give it time at first, because when you're making a major change, you're going to start seeing a ton of flaws. And part of your evaluation should be like a little praise, like, hey, man, I made a lot of a lot of progress here. Maybe you're working on anger. Okay. Don't focus on the 5 times you got angry today or yesterday. Focus on the fact that it was only 5 times. And a month ago, you used to be angry every second of the day. And I use anger because that was like my big thing. That's what started my whole journey, was me realizing that I was the angriest person I knew. And that anger took over my whole life. Now, anger isn't comfort, but anger provided me comfort, because if things didn't go my way, I just would naturally be angry. Oh, the world's against me. Well, the world's not against me. Like, the world didn't say, oh, there's going to be 25 people in line and I need to be out of here in 5 minutes, or whatever would just used to set me off. It's just something we have to deal with. And without self-evaluation and without monitoring our comfort, which would be something, if I wrote the book again, I would probably write a whole section about comfort. And I'm not saying you should suffer at all, but you might need to struggle a little bit. Especially when you're learning something new and you're making improvements. So yeah, beware of comfort and really, really, really assess and evaluate when you're falling into it, because it's a silent trap that
Sure.
a lot of times we won't know it until we're deep into it.
Yeah, I like. Interesting. You mentioned you got to suffer a little bit. Like when I think about when I think about Stoicism, for example, at least on the ethical side of Stoicism, not on the metaphysical side of it. Obviously, we're not talking really about that sort of thing right now, but they seem to value kind of like our ability to have self-control, not just the outcomes, because those outcomes are going to be things that include variables that are not in our control. When I contrast that to something like Christianity that sees like a redemptive quality in suffering, so it's somewhat concerned with what happens because of that suffering. It's not just the suffering itself. It's like, what does that mean in the end? So like, could people with 2 different worldviews like that kind of equally pursue hard, but would it look the same when they did it? Like, does this kind of apply to people from different walks of life, or would it be different in some way?
Yeah, it's always going to be different depending on your perspective and your philosophy. Like you said, if from the Stoic perspective, yeah, I mean, they teach you to do without so you can appreciate what you have. The Christian philosophy and religion is based on one man suffering for, redemption, like you mentioned. I do think that both of them are probably complement your hard, because both of them want you to be in a place where you're doing what your purpose is. So if it's Stoicism, it's finding your tranquility with yourself. For Christianity, in a lot of ways, I would argue that is also to find tranquility in yourself because you've been given a gift from someone else. And a lot of those burdens are taken off of you. So yeah, it's interesting, and as you know, I've kind of been exploring this intersection between Stoic and Christianity, and the biggest pushback I get is more from the Stoic community than the Christian community, because and it goes back to the metaphysical part that you were talking about from Stoicism, but yet at the same time, both, if you lay them side by side and you take Stoic quote to Scripture, they're all about living a good life and finding work that matters to you, right? It's not being caught up in the things of the world. Like the Stoics are famous for, they're part of the world, but they're separate. They're walking around being senators, emperors, all these, teachers. They're in the mix all the time. Same with Christianity. If you take the life of Christ and look at it, he was out amongst the people, but yet he still kept his values, his purpose, his identity throughout it. So I think there's a lot to learn from both of them. I think the real problem is if you think dogmatically, going back to my negative side of dogmatic here, if you think it can only be one way, I think you miss the point. You've got to find the way that's right for you and follow it, and then augment yourself with religion or other practices. I don't think you have to be, I think you can be a Christian and a Stoic. I think you can be a Stoic and not be Christian. I think you can be, a lot of things you can be. I think you can be Stoic and a Buddhist. You can be a Christian and a Buddhist in a lot of ways, right? I know a lot of theologians would disagree with me on this. And, you bring up a point, I know we're kind of off, like maybe hard as a general principle here, but it really goes back to what your philosophy is. And I think that's what hard ultimately is like, what's your philosophy in life? Do you have one? The more I dig into this, the more I find most people don't have a philosophy of life. I know I certainly didn't for a long time, but Marcus Aurelius says you should have standards in your life and you should be like a rock where the waves crash against you, but you don't change. Well, imagine if you have so many standards in your life and you're so cemented in what you believe is true you, the core you, as you mentioned earlier, it's going to be much easier to stay in your hard work because you're going to know what you want to do. And your standards could be based on Christian principles. They could be based on other principles. But at the end of the day, only you can define those principles. And it's very easy to slip into easy hard if you just take the Stoics and try to live exactly like they did it. And, there's been many evolutions of Stoicism. Like there was the Greek, and then it became Roman, and then it disappeared for a while. And now it's coming back into modern day Stoicism, which is wildly popular. And why is it wildly popular? Because I think most people are struggling with exactly what we're talking about right now. The dissatisfaction of the things of earth, the external, the extrinsic rewards that everyone's facing, extrinsic motivation. Because both Christianity, Stoicism, they both center on you. Like, what are you doing and how are you going about it?
So it seems to me like in today's, the world we live in, compared to how I might see the way things might have been before we were here, like there's a lot of pathways now. There's so many pathway options. There's so many different paths you can take in life where somebody advertises that there's going to be meaning. And they're dead ends. They're really just false dopamine type things. And we've never had this dopamine assault ever, I think, before the way we have now, right? For most people. So, follow all these people on social media and you're going to be like them. Or maybe is that a dead end for you to be sitting there scrolling and watching what they're doing, right? There's so many ways that it's advertised as meaning for you, but it's actually potentially just a dead end. And I think what you're saying is there are still some different paths of real meaning and different perspectives about meaning. But what's important is you know yourself and you kind of know how to say that's a dead end, that's not a dead end. I'm going to pursue hard. That's real hard. That's not just an easy hard disguised as a hard, which there are so many of. So I don't know. When I hear the thing about Stoics pushing on what you're kind of talking about, I would almost, my mind goes to if what's in there are only so many things in our control. That's kind of a part of focus on virtues, right? If you're virtuous, you shouldn't care about the rest. Okay, well, if we can acknowledge that what else is going on in the world is out of our control, and some of the things we're going to encounter in the future are out of our control, then if we focus on the things that are in our control now with a good understanding of who we are and how each of those actions serves to be a brick in the wall we're building of ourselves, then we're still sort of doing what's in our control to create an insurance policy against things that are out of our control, not because we want them to be in our control. We acknowledge that they're not, and that's why we put the work in on the things we can control. So, for me, the Stoic thing, at least from that one perspective, isn't necessarily a broken argument in any way. I think there's real legs on that too.
Yeah. And I think to go to your first point about all the options that are available right now, I would put those in a bucket of out of your control. I mean, you can't control all the offerings that are out there. And if you try, which most of us do, we hit the highlights, right? I know a lot of times I'll get jazzed up about something. I'll read the headline and not read the content. And I think that is kind of like you're outsourcing your control. And I think the Stoics parallel this because what you can control, again, is your thoughts and your actions, your behaviors. If I am worried about external things going on around me or in another country or another part of the world, that distracts me from my day-to-day life, right? Like dopamine hits that you get from like an inspirational video or something like that, they're very short-lived. Dopamine hit from living your values, your hard work is like eternal. You start seeing beauty in things that you never saw before. You start appreciating your time. You start appreciating yourself. So you don't get these, spikes. What you get is more steady dopamine and you kind of live. And I think that's what the Stoics are talking about, tranquility, because that's a word we don't really use anymore. I guess today we'd say peace, but then peace has other connotations, right? So what is your like middle ground? Where can you walk around the most without these emotional spikes, be dopamine hits, be it, trying the new thing? Because again, if you're excited, like I tell you, I've got the answer. If you do this for 7 days, you're going to lose 8 pounds. You get very excited about it. But how about if you lose 7? Are you
Yeah.
disappointed? And that's where living, the objective isn't how many pounds you lose in that example. The example is that you lose some pounds. So whether it's 1 pound or 7 pounds, you succeeded. But then you go back to, well, did I sacrifice myself in order to get this result? And I think that's where the real problem comes. And then I think that's why we crave dopamine more than we ever have in our life, is because we can't take satisfaction in the things that should be natural dopamine producing, right? Progress, you know, accomplishments that we're doing for ourselves every day. And sometimes you can't measure them. Sometimes it's just a feeling like I feel better tonight when I went to sleep than I did last night.
Yeah, and sometimes it can be hard to identify, or sure, not to identify, but the positive feeling you get from accomplishing something for you over a duration of time is something that it's hard to describe it until you've done it, right? And so, like you're pleading with everything you have. This is such a great currency. You really want this. This is the currency you really are after. But for someone who doesn't have that currency, it's hard. Like, well, I've never used that currency. How do I know it's got value? And you're just trying desperately to say, trust me. Once you get a little bit up this curve, you're going to definitely be appreciate it and know that it's the truth. So I got a couple things to say here. I have this kind of mental model of this U-shaped channel, and in it is like a steel ball that fits in the channel. And when everything in my life is going in accordance with kind of the vision I have and the core of me, that ball is sitting right smack dab on the bottom in the center, where I would call its neutral spot. It doesn't require all my effort and energy and strain to keep it there. It's naturally there. And as soon as I start to feel a little bit like I'm not doing enough of this, or I'm not giving attention to that, or I'm hiding who I am to some extent, I'm not fulfilled. That ball is off center now, and I'm using my own personal energy to hold it away from its natural spot. And I got to learn how to get out of the way, get that thing back to neutral. So that's kind of like a model I kind of keep in my head. In addition to that, you talked about sacrifice a little bit, and it reminded me like that's sounds like what your dad was saying, right? Like when your dad was saying that, do you really want this? He was saying, are you imitating someone else's want, or is this your want that belongs to you? But he was also probably saying, are you ready for the price? Like doing that's going to mean you're giving something else up. Have you considered that? And given what you have to give up, are you still interested in going through it? Am I understanding that right?
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And when you say yes to one thing, you say no to many things.
Yeah.
And like you said, are you willing to put the work in to get the result that you want? Are you willing to say no to whatever it is? Again, this goes back to comfort. Maybe a lot of the things that you do in life are comfortable for you, and you're going to have to give those up for a while. Are you willing? Do you want it enough to make the change? And I think like going through that decision process and your self-discovery is very, very valuable, because now we know it. Like so many people will start a change without really taking a look at what they're going to have to give up. And then they try to fit it all in. Well, what's the one thing that gets out? The thing they say they want the most. So I would argue that you don't want that the most. And your model that you talk about, your mental model, is exactly right. That ball, when you get out of kilter and you try to do too much all at once, or you don't really want it, it takes more mental energy to do the thing than it would be if you get there. And you also brought up a really good point too, is it does sometimes take a long time. When I was in my weight loss, a lot of experts told me to do this exercise and feel my glutes. A 350-pound man will not feel their glutes. But I stayed with it because these were experts, and I knew that these people came from a good place and they were trying to help me on my journey. Well, one day I felt my glutes. And like, I can't even describe to you how cool that was, because I followed a process for a long time, did these exercises religiously because someone who was an expert in the field told me to, but also it was a goal and a desire I wanted, because I knew that this was part of my recovery and my health journey. And then when I felt them, bam. Well, think of that. Then I could, like, my reassessment, my self-discovery changed in a moment. Like now I was in tune with my body, and I could then see if I was doing exercises correctly in the future. I could explore how to do it more, but it took some time to get there, is what I'm saying. Maybe at first that's what you need to do, is a daily evaluation of your actions and behaviors, not to the point of overthinking, but maybe that's to get people over the hump at first. I know what I'm selling isn't sexy because it takes time, and depending on how long you do it and how far you have to come, it may take longer. But see the joy every single day. Reestablish that want to. You may go down a path, and I talk about this in the book. You may start something that's your hard, and it turns out it's not a hard for you. Maybe you just weren't mature enough. You weren't emotionally intelligent enough. That's okay too. Quitting is frowned upon in our culture generically, but specifically, and I think I bring up this whole example, is like if someone quits smoking, does anyone says, "Oh man, Angelo, you're an idiot. You should have quit smoking. That's terrible to quit something." No, we celebrate things like that. And I think that's another important part of this process that we want to talk about. You need to celebrate the wins that you do, because that helps feed that energy. Like maybe you are struggling, maybe you are pushing that ball up the track a little bit, but that celebration allows you to ease up. Maybe you're trying too hard. I know I'm kind of opening up a can of a lot of thoughts here, but
yeah, well, now you've done it. So yeah, you brought the Roman Empire into it. I've learned recently that we're all coincidentally thinking about the Roman Empire all the time. I don't know why we're doing that, but that's what I'm learning. I wonder if that self-assessment more frequently, but not in kind of a draining kind of way, is what people are doing when they're putting that picture up on the mirror that they see every morning, right? It's just that every day I remember I want that. Don't lose focus. I want that. And eventually, it's who you are. It's in your character, it's your routine. Maybe you don't need that picture necessarily anymore. But in those first days, those first fragile moments where you're adopting something new, it is nice to have kind of that reappraisal to your point, in a lighter way, because we can quickly make these things academic. And like you said, I don't think it's a negative thing that this isn't like some sexy thing that you're trying to speak to people about. I think when we're talking about meaning in our lives, we ought to take the time. That's what I'm all about here with this, is that taking the real time to give the ideas that are worth it because they make a difference in our lives, the time to have the conversation in full. So let's not try to make something sexy. Let's just say it's sexy to have a good life, and let's work on that day by day. Dostoevsky talks about that we shouldn't think about happiness as like the result of something where like we're suffering, sacrificing, we're doing all these things, and then happiness just occurs at the end. It's actually that we should take happiness in the activities themselves along the way. And so I kind of heard that in your story about, that day when you felt your glute wasn't the day where you reached your goals. It was somewhere along the way, but you took the joy in that. And I think it's really important that you said you got to kind of every day, you got to enjoy it. And let's find ways to pursue our hard. Difficult as that might be, let's know ourselves, let's pursue our hard. And as we're doing that, let's make sure that there's happiness in the endeavor, right? Like, I don't think what you're saying is, hey, take your happiness, put it over to the side. And one day, if you do this stuff, you'll be happy one day. I don't think you're saying that at all. I think what you're saying is like, find joy in that endeavor. And in fact, maybe the reason so many people feel burnt out and aimless and hopeless and meaningless is because they're not spending their day doing those things that incrementally go in a direction that they find meaningful, right? So am I representing what your claim is well there with that?
You are. And I just want to clarify something, because I had this thought about the difference between joy and happiness. So joy is what you feel about yourself, or I'm going to define it as, because we use those terms interchangeably in English, especially in North America here. But how about if we redefine joy as what you feel every day? You hear people talk about enjoy the process, not the result. Well, the joy is that you get to go do the process. I in my change, a lot of times I would say, oh, I have to work out. And then it got to be, I get to work out. I'm excited to work out. That's joy. Okay. The happiness then came when I completed a PR, or I ran a little bit further, or I did a little bit more. And I think that might be one of the missing elements in kind of our journey, is we expect everything to be happy like every single day. But how about if things can be joyful every single day? Once you make this decision and you start taking the first step, you're starting to fill your cup with joy. And again, I know it's kind of a novel concept and it kind of sounds like I'm splitting hair here, but think about joy as the internal and the happiness are the external. And again, give it the due that it needs. The internal joy should always be filled. And if that starts waning, that's time to really take a look at it and start asking yourself some harder questions. How do I build this joy back? How do I enjoy this? But then the happiness, like you said, so the joy was the health journey. The happiness was that one moment in time where I felt it. If I stopped right there, then the result wouldn't have been completed. But then that both fed my joy, but also didn't make me think, oh, I've arrived. Because then again, you also have this thing where people get to where they want to be and then they stop. If you decide to live a better life, it is an ongoing daily thing. You're always going to be stretching yourself. And until you have that joy bucket that fuels you day in and day out, I don't see how it's possible to continue for most people.
I think there's what I'm hearing, correct me if I'm wrong, is I've got here joy is something that's something you're experiencing. It could be a daily experience. While I'm going through a thing, how am I feeling about that, right? And what the way you've defined happiness is a reflective feeling about a progress or an achievement, but it's reflective rather than in the moment experience of what the step or the action actually is. And the really interesting point I think you made was that people can get to this point where they feel maybe they had this vision for where I'm going to get to, and one day they get there. I see this actually often. I'm in an environment where I speak to people who've kind of made it, quote unquote, to whatever the degree that they were hoping, and that doesn't mean that they're happy people. And it doesn't mean that their day is filled with joy. They might be content, or they might be happy reflectively about the fact that they've climbed this mountain that they had for a long time. Here I've climbed, I'm proud, and I look back and I think, wow, look, I did that. But your whole life can't be carried by this feeling about what you've done in the past. It also has to be carried by what you're doing in the present, right? And I think what you're saying is that's the rule of joy for you is make sure you're doing something right now where you still get that feeling. So better is a relative term. I can never reach the end of where the better spectrum goes, right? No, I think the concepts are good. And yeah, that's what I took from it. One is kind of experiential and in progress, and the other one is a little bit reflective and post progress. So, no, those are good concepts, and they do kind of justify for me how people, myself included, can feel sometimes. Why am I still? Why do things still not feel right, even though I've done all that stuff? Because even if sometimes it's because you weren't doing the hard, but let's say you were. Let's grant that you have been doing the hard. What you're saying, I think, is that you don't get to some resting place where it's like you don't have to try anymore. That's not really what life is about, and that's not what people need anyway. Like if I could just snap my fingers right now, and I could say that you get every form of there's no friction anymore in the world. There's just going to be no friction for you. Like, do you think that people would be more satisfied, or do you think people would be left aimless and empty because of that?
Yeah, I think there'd probably be a lot of emptiness there because it's the pursuit, right? That's what drives us. That's what we're designed for. But I also like the way you summarized what I said earlier, because we say, oh, if I have X amount in my bank account, I'll be happy. Well, you get to X amount and the economy's changed, or your situation has changed, or you have more obligations than you did and it's not enough. Well, do you discount where you got, or are you joyful that you got there and then replan what you're going to go forward? They say comparison's the thief of all joy. And they're typically talking about if I compare myself to you or some famous athlete or whatever, why don't we compare ourselves to ourselves?
You can compare yourself to the future self you've now redefined and still be unhappy because you're never going to be like, here, yeah, how far did I make it in the last 10 years? Fine. But look, the next 10 years, I got to be there. So I'm too busy looking at what I could be. And I'm not giving myself any credit for what I've become. So like, I like your point, give yourself credit, but compare yourself to yourself from where you came from, you know?
Yeah. Or at least be appreciative of where you're at. The thing is our desires keep growing. And that goes back to our span of control and looking at internally versus externally. How about if we could all just tap into the joy we used to feel when we were 6, 7, 8, and all we had to do was go play with our friends and experience new things, learn about what we want to learn about, ask questions about this, that, and the other. Well, we've replaced that with things that other people tell us we want to do. We put these limiters on ourselves that I think are so damaging that makes the easy hard like the prize, because we're more scared about what my neighbor's going to think if they see me leave on a Wednesday morning with all my fishing gear than if they see me leaving in my suit and tie to go to work. And if we can't find joy in right now, we're never going to find our hard. We're always going to be pursuing something that isn't real, an ideal, an expectation, or something like that.
Yeah, and not to confuse joy with some sort of level of complacency where like you can say, I'm grateful for where I'm at, but still address that I've got some work to do if I want to get to there and self-discipline about that. I wonder, is there a way that somebody could pursue things that are meaningful to them subjectively and be worse off for it, or even maybe morally worse off for it? So let me give an example. Like, supposing somebody abandons their career or their job for some other one that they find more meaningful. But as a consequence to that, they can't make some sort of obligations to their family. Like it's harder to pay bills, or maybe they're divorced and they've got kids, and now it's harder to pay child support, or their kid's not going to go to university because they can't save up for something like that. Or another example, which is a whole other category, I think, is if there are historical examples seriously about people who have found real meaning and identity in doing things that are quite harmful to other people. How do we apply moral boundaries to this concept so that when someone pursues their personal meaning, they're not doing that with disregard for, morality at large, or are they separate things and you don't touch on that? Like, I don't want to put you in an unfair box here, but that seems to me like it could be a challenge.
Yeah, no, it's not normally what I speak about, but it's a really good point to consider, because obviously if what you're doing is harmful for others, I'm going to first make the argument that that's not hard. obviously we can go back to the history books and find a lot of intentional harm that was put on people, right? I don't think no matter how much they thought that was their purpose in life, I think it was an easy hard, right? They were doing it for the appraisal of those around them, whether they were a dictator or king or something like that, the people they oppressed. I don't think that's right. But your more modern example about someone, who has obligations, again, this is where I think that like a lot of people, when they find their hard, they really need to assess what their obligations and their duties are, because you cannot abandon those. Because I also would argue that if you have children or a household to feed, clothe, and take care of, if you abandon that in any way or degrade that in any way, how can you truly live at peace? That's where I think self-leadership becomes selfishness. And I know they both have the word self in there. And a lot of people say, oh, lead yourself, focus on yourself is very selfish. But there is a fine line there where it can be selfless. So if you do decide to make a change, and again, this is another thing that we talked about earlier. Like if you think that changing you means change your job, that probably means you made your job your identity versus yourself. Can you be the person you want to be in the job you're currently at? If the answer truly is no, if your moral or your ethical prevents you from doing that, I think then it's the time to explain that, right? And talk to the people that are under your care and figure out a new way. And maybe that means you have to take on 2 jobs, or you have to change your lifestyle or something like that. That would be the only time I would say that like finding your hard would have to be that dramatic of a consequence. But I think it's such in the minutia of what most people do. And then most people replace morals with what they want. And that's where it also becomes selfish. And that's why morals are very difficult, because morals are defined by a society, but they're also defined by you internally. And again, it's so easy I would say it's very easy hard to fall into making your morals what you want to do to support your decision, just like you justify your actions because, you want someone else to look at you better. That's a very deep question, Angelo, and I appreciate it. And I hope that kind of gives a little bit, but again, justice is a core of both Christianity and Stoicism and pretty much every philosophy and religion in the world. Well, justice takes on a new meaning in today's culture. But what is justice? It's taking care of those around you. It's that community base. It's being kind and not intentionally harmful to others.
Yeah, no, I think you touched on some interesting things. So I would call myself a moral subjectivist. However, one of the things that you touched on was that, you're not pursuing your own sense of meaning in isolation, right? And that you can mean that in a couple of ways. You could mean like just because it's your goal doesn't mean you can't recruit help for that goal. Like when you're talking to your family about making a decision about what to do, they might help you come up with the solutions and the pathway for that, right? So if you're a person who's trying to go down that type of a path, that doesn't mean don't ever talk to anybody and nobody can ever be of assistance or support for that you have a community that can support you. Just because it's your path, you're not isolated. And I think the same thing with morality. Just because it's subjective doesn't mean it's not a social contract we ought to recognize that's founded upon values about human life and that sort of thing. Also, you mentioned this is something, you said this earlier, it's not something that happens in one day. So if it was your job and it meant changing that career, and changing that career meant it at present jeopardizing some other duties and responsibilities, well, there's no one saying that in order to move to another career, you ought to do that before getting other things in order. It is about taking the actions, maybe in the order you ought to take those actions, to make that happen in a way that doesn't harm everybody else. And then the last thing I think, and related to the first one, was kind of that like my own happiness and sense of meaning is tied up with other people's happiness. And so like, I'm not going to pursue happiness in a way that takes my family and puts them out. Then that actually interferes with my happiness, even just if I'm being selfish. So I think in all those ways, and you did touch on all of that, I'm just trying to kind of summarize them as you were speaking there, just into my own words. But I think all that still holds. There will be probably exceptions to that, where somebody says, well, I just don't recognize the value of anybody but myself, and I'm going to just decide things, and my moral subjectivity is just mine. And when I want to pursue subjective meaning, the consequences to everybody else doesn't matter. And I think that's a sociopath, and we have a justice system for that person. But let's just address that there are exceptions, but the exceptions define the rule. There's a reason we call it an exception. By identifying that, then we're saying that's not the norm. So let's address that too. So for those people listening here, if you're a sociopath, report yourself. But if you're not, then we got something good for you. If we're not measuring the outcome here as like success, I know that's a broad word and that's a word we can interpret, but like, are we kind of, when we say it, that are we looking for virtue at the end of our life? We're looking for a life that we find. When we say we want a life of meaning, are we saying we kind of want like a virtuous life that we can stand behind versus like a tokened successful life?
Yeah, because success is such a weird measure, right? Because success for you may be different than me. Success for society may be different. So yeah, I think I heard it one time that said, hell is meeting the person you could have been the day that you die. That summarizes virtue to me. Like, what are my standards? What did I do that I could control to promote those standards? And then if I were in a court with my peers, could I be convicted that I lived my standards? To me, that's how I define success. Not by anything external, but how I live in relationship with me and then my outpouring to my community. Going back biblical, when Jesus was asked, what are the greatest commandments? And, the Bible has a lot of commandments. He said, love the Lord your God, love your neighbor as yourself. Imagine if that is success. You love God, you love others, you love yourself. And that sounds really simplistic, but to me, that's what I define as success. And that could partly become from a place where I didn't love myself. I didn't even like myself. So how could I love others? Well, that's not peace for me, because to me, I identified that as something that's a core to my beliefs, my morals, my ethics. Everything I do falls under those three categories. So if I stray in any way from those, I've missed the mark. I'm unsuccessful no matter what the world sees in me. It's what do you see as success in yourself?
So there's a number of things you mentioned there that might be ways that people reflect on their life and kind of measure it up, like about whether they lived well or not. And I guess synonymous to that, in the way you've presented it, whether you addressed the hard or not. Do you see anything, any sort of commonality about what people tend to regret the most? And do you think that the problem is that people need more knowledge, or do you think that they kind of know what's right and there's something else going on there?
As far as my observation on what people regret the most, it seems like how they spend their time and the pursuits that they chase. Is it intentional? Are you giving yourself away for the pursuit of someone else's success, someone else's pleasure? And I don't remember what your second question was.
Oh, just like, yeah. Do you think that they're lacking the knowledge to pursue the things that would be meaningful so that they don't have those regrets? Or do you think do you think they know what's right and there's something else in the way of that?
I think most people know it. They don't give themselves permission or the authority to go after it. Because like I said, it all goes back to the culture that we live in. It's always about more, 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 and less about what do you want. We all have a finite time on the earth. Sure, we all have different duties and obligations, and so not all hours are the same. But if you're spending every hour that you've got, the knowledge, internally. Like, I don't know about you, but how many times have you had to go to work on a Saturday or Sunday and felt bad about it? How many times are you doing something and you're thinking about what you're not doing? So the knowledge is there. I just think we're scared to give ourselves permission. I think that goes for everything we've talked about today. You have to give yourself permission to do whatever it is you do in life. And when you violate that permission and it feels weird, might be time to say, hey, this isn't right for me. Let me reconsider how I'm doing my actions and behaviors to make sure I'm aligned more.
Yeah, so it sounds like maybe inactivity can almost be a decision about self-preservation, about preservation of the status quo we know. It could be also of our ego, because when I do something new, I might look like a fool or other people might judge me. And that's probably more and more relevant as we put ourselves out in the world in a digital way. But yeah, even when it comes to things like how we live in our homes. So that's a really interesting point. So someone's watching this, they want to start identifying their hard. What are some actions that they could? What's the first thing they're going to do? They're listening to you. They read your book. They're bought in. Go get the book. It's a great book, and it's a very helpful book, and it goes deeper than what we went today on this specific topic about easy hard versus hard and finding what matters to you. But they got to take an action. They want to take. They're bought in. They want to take that action today. What's something somebody might be able to do?
I think this goes back to my last thing. Give yourself permission. Go back and look at all the times you've thought about something and you haven't given yourself permission. And you may say, hey, Bobby, what is that? What are you thinking about when you have nothing else to think about? I would start there. When everything's quiet, you're about to go to sleep, and you think it could be something you said you'd do. I'd learn to play the banjo, or I'd pursue this or whatever. That might be the first place to start, and then give yourself permission. And then take a look at your life and say, well, what can I then put this in? How can I incorporate this into my life? Because no one's coming to save you. Reading my book, listening to this podcast, reading a million other books, not going to do anything for you until you give yourself permission and are at peace with where you're at. There is hope. There is promise. The more you avoid the things that matter to you, the less that seems likely. So change that thinking. Again, goes back to the two things we can control, your thinking and your actions. Identify that one area and go after it. That would be the first step I would tell every single person to do if they want to make a change.
Yeah, this is obviously, like, we're not saying this is the easiest path, right? Like, if this was the easiest thing you could do, it would just be the way. There's a reason it has to be a decision, right? Because there are easier options. So no one's saying like, hey, go do the easiest thing. But I think you are saying like, take a moment, know who you are, know what makes you feel a certain way. What you think about in the time when you're idle or when the time when you're not otherwise occupied might be a hint at, your future vision for yourself, or the things that you're proud of yourself about. Where you think you might have some capabilities, or things that you've abandoned in your life in the past that you want to come back to. I know I can identify with that idea where I can think about what time in my life did I feel the most like me. And if I sort of replicate some of those things, I start to feel more like me. And it's hard to explain what that means because it's different for everyone, but there is such a thing as me waking up and feeling more like me than I did a week ago. So what's behind that sort of foundation of this? What am I? What are the things that make me feel like me? But it's not the default, because it's not the easiest thing of all the options that you have. What do you think people have to be prepared to sacrifice? I mean, your father, what's his name?
Richard.
Thank you for the wisdom, Richard. I hope everyone hears about Richard and his wisdom. What do people have to be honest with themselves about if they're going to go down the hard path?
They've got to be honest with their intention. The hard part is because of where you're at right now. All the obstacles, all the limitations that you put on yourself. Like, how many of our problems are self-imposed? How many of them are trapped in our brain? Finding your want to and not worrying about what the next person thinks about that venture. You know, you always see that one guy that's like dressed differently and just joyful. You know, there's probably people in everyone's life. There's one person, two people in your life. Like, every time you think of this person, you're smiling right now. I can tell you're thinking of somebody in your life, and they're not the norm. They're different, but you know what? They are who they are. They know who they are. And, you know, the people in my life that are like that, I haven't seen them, but I'm thinking about them. But next time I do, I'm going to say, how do you operate like this? Like, why? How do you think about the world? Because instead of looking at them like, oh, you're odd, be like, oh, what are you tapping into? And that doesn't mean that I'd start dressing like them or acting like them, but where is that for me? Like, what lights me up? Ask others, like, what lights you up? And I think you'll find that maybe just having those conversations with others will help you find it yourself. Because a lot of times we get so lost in what makes us happy and what makes us joyful and makes us hopeful and all these things. Ask someone else, because they see probably the pain in you that you don't see in yourself.
Yeah, there's people who have a different ingredient in the recipe for a well-lived life. And let's assemble those ingredients. Dr. Bobby Shelton, it's been great. Thank you for taking the time with us and sharing how to live a well-lived life.
Hey, I appreciate it, Angelo. Fascinating discussion as always with you, my friend.